Welcome back. We are on video number 4 of the second part of our series called Thriving in Community.
We are.
We're talking about attachment love, or the Hebrew word hesed. Now, in talking about attachment love, it's one of the 4 ingredients for what we're referring to as good soil, where God's word causes transformation of our character. Yeah. And this is loosely based on the parable of the sower, sometimes known as the parable of the 4 soils that Jesus told. And you can read that in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And the 4 ingredients for good soil, as found in the book The Other Half of Church by Michael Hendricks and Jim Wilder, are joy, attachment love, group identity, and healthy correction. We've already covered joy in a video series, and we're now working through attachment love. I think one of the biggest aha moments for me from this whole series is that character change happens in the subconscious part of our mind.
Yeah, that for me too. That's huge, because that's just not at all, I think, what has ever been presented to me.
No, it's always been either, once we know the right thing, we'll do it, or we can choose to do the right thing,
exactly.
Or the Holy Spirit will give us the power to do the right thing, and
they play a part for sure.
Yeah, I'm not trying to discount any of those things, but they're not actually what causes the change. Yeah. And it's interesting that all the 4 things we've just mentioned take part on the right side of your brain and happen instinctively before we can consciously think about them in order to make a rational decision. So, and I'm not saying that we can't influence or train that part of our brain to respond the way we want to, but left untrained, we can obviously respond very negatively, especially comes to circumstances that cause us that cause us to have like big emotions like anger or fear. So I think in today we're going to be a little more technical, and again, I'll just reiterate, we're not psychologists, or we're basing this on the books we're reading. Yeah. And but it helps me at least to understand a little bit about how our brain works. So there's a part of our brain that is dedicated to who we attach to. That's right. That's called the attachment part of our brain.
And they actually say it's actually one of the most powerful things our brain feels.
Exactly. And as part of that same part of our brain is like a close neighbor called assessment. So the way they work together in this way, so whenever we interact with someone on a personal level, so if someone walks up to me and sticks out their hand and introduces themselves, my brain immediately, the attachment part of my brain lights up. And as soon as it lights up, it sends a signal to the assessment part of my brain to determine three possible sort of outcomes from my interaction.
Right.
Is this going to be a good interaction, a bad interaction, or a scary interaction?
Right.
And the outcome of that assessment will give us the indication of how to respond. And remember, this all happens faster than our very first thought about whatever that person
that's actually quite amazing.
Yeah.
When we think about it, because I think I'm still really trying to even grasp that idea. Because that thought can come really fast. And to think that this is coming faster, it blows my mind just how fast
my brain does all that before I can think about it. So, and I just trying to think of a way that we can sort of give an example of that. So if you ever had a response to someone that you've never met and you immediately determined they were like bad or scary, only to find out later that they were actually a good person. Yeah. And I'm thinking, what causes that to happen? So this can obviously happen in a first meeting of a person, particularly if they remind you of some other interaction or circumstance you've had with a person that was actually bad. And the person you're meeting for the first time looks similar, or has a similar mannerism.
There's something that
tone of voice
makes that connection.
Yeah, but your brain determines that before you can think about it. Yeah. And so the assessment center will make that assessment based on the previous experience. And again, it happens faster than we can think about it. Yeah. And you will get a feeling about that person before you can even decide to give the person the benefit of the doubt. Mm-hmm. And I actually have a bit of a story that goes along with this. I remember I think it was my second real job when I was out in the real world. And I was moving from Ottawa to Toronto in Ontario. And the person who hired me, there was 2 people, but the one was the owner of the company.
Right.
And he was, I didn't find out till later. He was kind of he wasn't a fat man, but he was a large man, and he was he was larger than life. He must have been 6'3" or 4". And whatever, and he's just one of those personalities where he just lights up the room wherever he is.
Right.
And he was part of the hiring process, and he was kind of tough during the interview part of but once I got to know him and I got hired, and he was generous with me and my family. Whenever we worked late, he would buy the staff dinner, and he was nice to my family, and he treated me well. But he was one of those sort of overly confident kind of person.
Sure.
And when things were going his way, it was like everything was great. And it turns out that he actually ended up selling the company. We were taken over by somebody else. And it turns out that he was not a good person at all.
Oh, wow.
He was a very immature person, and he was deceitful, and he basically tricked everybody that was part of the company. People that were shareholders thought they were getting more money, and he had structured things in a very strange way so that he was the beneficiary mostly of the sale.
Right.
And none of that came out until after. So I remember after all that came out, how everybody else felt about him and how I felt about him. We felt betrayed. And ever since then, I've had issues with people when I first meet them who seem overconfident.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And it's like my first reaction is to withdraw from that person. And so I think that leads us into the next part of the story, where the responses of our assessment center are joy if it's good.
Yep.
And if it's bad or scary, we respond with what we've all heard before as flight, fight, or freeze.
Yeah, there's actually there's the fourth F in that. There's the fawn as well.
Okay.
Which is really about people pleasing at that point.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes. I do remember that now. So we actually previously discussed this idea of attachment in the joy part of our video, the joy series. And we're just going to sort of expand on what we talked about there here. So our relationships with other people fall into generally two categories. There's either joy bonds or fear bonds. And research shows that all of us really long for and hope for and are meant to have joy bonds with other people.
Makes sense.
People who feel safe with, people who love and support us, people who we can be our real selves around, that we don't have to be guarded or pretend to be something we're not. And people who even help us get back to being our joyful, real selves when we might act otherwise, when circumstances might cause us to experience one of the 6 big emotions.
Right. Yeah, because again, we go to that fear-based attachment, which again, you have the joy or the fear. And this is where we tend to have those responses that we just brought up, the fight, flight, fawn, or freeze.
Yep.
And that anger might cause us to fight. Fear might lead us to some sort of despair. You might cause us to flee or isolate. Or again, we try, with the other fawn, we try to, just constantly please that person. So, or whatever the situation, so there's no explosion or that.
We're always in like people management mode.
Exactly. Or we just freeze, and so this can happen when we get triggered. Mm-hmm. That any one of these responses get activated.
Yeah, and I think that's when people say they are triggered, it's usually one of those things that have happened to them, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Something has, exactly.
Excuse me. So now I think just to help us better understand ourselves, we want to look at some of the nuances of the fear-based attachments. Now, again, I want to reiterate, we're basing our talk today on the book Building Bounce by Marcus Warner and Jim Wilder, who is a neuroscientist and a trained psychologist. So we are not psychologists, but we're just presenting what we understand that from the material we've read, and we understand that what we're presenting here today is not exhaustive.
Yeah.
This is a very large topic, and there's a lot of research, and there's a lot to understand here. But so we're going to just kind of give a brief overview of some of the fear-based attachments, just to help us understand ourselves better and sort of to contrast the joy-based attachment so that we have a better understanding of it.
And I think just as we look at these fear-based attachments, We can even just see, there's three and covered in the book, and they call them dismissive, distracted, and disorganized. And I think it is good. I know I've been really helped by this because I can kind of recognize a little bit like, oh shoot, I have formed attachments and can form attachments.
Yep. I see myself in some of these too. Yeah. So let's start with the dismissive one.
All right.
Dismissive attachments are formed when my brain lights up, hoping for a relational connection, but no one responds.
Yeah. Yeah, this can happen often, and so our brains can learn to ignore and eventually not even notice that the light is coming on.
That's almost sad.
It is.
Yeah.
And then we can kind of, in that dismissive form, it really becomes difficult to make attachments.
Yep.
So that we can be friendly. And I think this is the big thing. We can be friendly.
Yep.
Yet really struggle in creating a long-term, meaningful relationship.
Yeah, I think we've all met people like that where they seem friendly and you might go out of your, this is a person I could really be friends with. And no matter how hard you try, it never seems to go anywhere.
And I mean, I think I've even found myself in this sometimes where how do I connect and like, I know how to be friendly. And because sometimes I think we teach people how to be friendly, but we don't necessarily have been taught and teach each other how to connect and really what that means.
What it means, yeah. And I guess if we take that to the absolute worst case, people can become like numb to relationships and they don't feel any impulse to attach when they meet somebody.
Yeah. Okay,
let's go on to the distracted attachment. It's created because I am expected to light up and turn on when others need me, but they don't necessarily respond when I need them. Mm-hmm. So as a result, then the light bulb in my attachment center stays on most of the time, just in case someone needs to attach. So then people are distracted, are just that. They're easily distracted. They tend to give their attention to whatever or whoever is scariest and demands their attention rather than who or what deserves their attention. That's a big distinction.
That is, yes, very much so. Yeah, because I think that's where you can look at those who can be very focused on work, like the workaholic.
Yep.
They can treat everything in work kind of as more important, as urgent, and it can be fears like losing a job, disappointing the boss, or even some more inward stuff of just sort of like that says like, oh, this shows that I'm successful and that I'm worthwhile and so that there becomes this attachment not to people but to task and oriented and stuff like that.
Because their identity is actually in their job.
Exactly.
And so in those cases, they can focus way too much on their work and they can sacrifice their family time or friends. The relationships that actually can bring them joy and the joy they need, because we all need that, gets overridden by the fear of, like you say, not being successful. And I think I see myself in this one a lot. I know I grew up, our family wasn't destitute by any means, but we were poorer. And my dad left when I was 11. And so I always grew up with that idea that I wanted to be successful. And I actually worked pretty hard. And I know that in lots of cases, I did make sacrifices of my family for my job. And even when I started into ministry, I think I was still in that phase. And only through learning about things like this and practice over time that I've been able to have a more balanced approach to work and life outside of work.
Yeah. And I mean, even going back to sort of like how we, because I have found myself in this, in our description of it, like the idea of, that relational circuit lights up and turns on when others need me, but they don't necessarily respond when I need them.
Yeah.
Because so what happens is like, and there could be a good reason for that. Like,
sure.
But sometimes what happens is that the attachment really seems to only ever be like, I attach if you're in need, but if I'm in need, I'm a detached person.
Yeah.
And it becomes, so it's just like, you're not letting people in, but it can look a little deceptive. And not, again, let's be fair, I'm not saying people are being deceiving.
Yeah.
We're deceiving ourselves But you're like, well, but I am connected with them. Like, they had this need, I met it. They had this need, I met it. They had this need, I met it. But like, you just learn like, but if I have a need, no one's going to need it. So I'll just keep meeting other people's needs.
Yeah. Or I place a high value on being sufficient. And I don't want to be I have a fear of not being self-sufficient. So again, I make myself available, but because other people haven't been available for me, I've compensated in that way.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's really important as we talk about what healthy attachment, and we'll definitely get more into this, but healthy attachment is a two-way thing. It's really important. It's just like if somebody you're closed off, but you're giving of yourself, it could look like an attachment, but it's like, it's not a really fully attachment because you're only attaching one way.
Yeah, it becomes like the superhero complex. I'm always helping other people, but I don't need anybody's help.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's go on to the disorganized attachment. This is created when, particularly at a young age, in infants and children, when they have to bond with someone who is frequently scary, but they're not always scary. So they never know when it's safe to really bond. So when the attachment light comes on, the assessment center says, bad and scary, get away. But the attachment center is saying it's okay, get close. And so this leaves the brain with kind of an unsolvable problem that tends to make things shut down. And in this case, I think fawn falls into this category too.
I would think so.
Because if the person, you're not sure if the person's going to be scary or not, then you're going to do everything in your power to help them not be scary.
Yeah.
And so, but again, how do you get close and go away at the same time? So you experience a very difficult conflict inside yourself. And I think this is the fear bond is called disorganized because it's very hard to develop healthy relationships when you're just not sure, when your parents or your basic support group isn't consistent.
Yeah, and kind of sort of disorganized because we can really function differently.
Yeah.
Depending on the emotion or situation that is going on. And that can be just, again, like it can be really, again, disorganized.
Yeah. And I think obviously this can lead to personality disorders of many kinds when you're constantly having to be different people around different, or act differently around different people.
Yeah, there's definitely some
or not sure
and disassociation and different things can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing I think that's worthwhile having a discussion about is that even if we're forming fear-based attachments or joy-based attachments, I think there's a case where, particularly in the fear-based attachments, that if we're not able to make good connections relationally, then we want to escape from that. So a person will seek what we call alternative joys rather than an actual relationship with a joyful person. So what we're really talking about here is addiction.
Yeah.
So it becomes when the brain can't joy bond, it looks for a substitute in pleasure.
That's right. Yeah, and then with these substitutes, the addictions, they're really non-relational substitutes. Even though some of them can include people, it's interesting though. I've talked a little bit about this in some of these books. Even though like they can be not necessarily an object or a thing or whatever, a substance. It can be a person, but it's still a non-relational. We're not. It's still using that.
Yeah, sex falls into that.
Exactly.
It obviously can be a very intimate experience, but if it's an addiction, then it's going to be just taking pleasure for yourself and not caring.
It's using the person for pleasure as opposed to letting the joy be the connection with that person. And when that happens, we seek out the addiction over relationship, even at the expense of relationship.
Exactly. So this is one of the deepest parts of our brain function. You simply can't break addictions by choosing to stop or understanding that you need to stop. In this case, Jim, and the psychologist, who's one of the authors, says that new attachments have to be formed in order to overcome the addiction.
Well, that becomes some of the, when people find success when breaking addictions and things like AA, like there's so much of that is you are forming attachments with the people in that, like
group,
who've kind of walked a similar road that you have, but like there's that thing, and that those attachments become a really
and
important,
your sponsor,
important part of that. And so just like you can see that kind of exemplified through that sort of that structure. As we leave this on addictions.
It's been kind of a downer podcast, this one.
Yeah. Really, what this I think really points to is just it kind of going back to a full circle, going back to the idea of joy. And the idea of joy, again, kind of having that neuroscience that it was brought by Dr. Alan Shore, which is, the idea of relational joy, someone who is happy to be with you. That shines out. You can't tell by the shining of their face, the sparkle in the eye. And it's really important, I think, with the idea as one, we really believe that Jesus is happy to be with us.
Yeah.
Two, as followers of Jesus, we need to make sure that we are doing that to each other.
Yeah.
That we are happy to be with each other. And that means happy to be with each other as we can have some unhealthy attachments.
Yeah.
And we're even happy to be with you in the midst of our growing out of and healing from some of the reasons why we
need to have the idea that we're cultivating joy.
Exactly. And so, and then we wanted to, even as a community, make sure that we are expressing joy to the people that we come in encounter with throughout the week, and so it's all that. So it is going back to some of those practices of joy, doing that with each other, helping each other, one another form joy-based attachments, and to each other and ultimately to God. And so, what I just really encourage you, if you're listening to this right now or watching this, however you've chosen to take this in, I want you to take 2 or 3 minutes after we're gone here, and it's something we've done a little bit called, if you've been watching other videos, called Joy Memories, and it's just going to a memory that you have that feels good. Maybe it's simple as a coffee with a good friend that was just with lots of laughs. Maybe it was a walk in a park and just the scenery. It was just something that happened in the last couple of weeks. Yeah. Maybe it's something that happened a couple of years ago, a vacation, a trip you took. Just take a few moments. It's really helpful if, sometimes we've got access to our phones. So I don't have mine with me right now, but phones that we've taken pictures of it, just to sit there and just remember that memory, that joy memory, especially remember those that might have been with you in that memory, and just take that moment and then even go a little further and say, maybe where was Jesus in that memory? And maybe something he's telling you in that memory, and just take a few moments with that, because it's when we practice things like that, those are the things that can aid us in the ability to grow in joy-filled attachments and hesed. So just taking moments in our life. So again, I just encourage you to take 2 or 3 moments. Maybe you've done this already today, and you can just you've got that in front of you. You can go right there. Maybe this is a little bit of if not something you're doing a lot of or hardly at all, and this might be difficult. Be patient with yourself. It took me some time to do it as well, but I just encourage you 2 or 3 minutes. Just to start to again develop so our brains can experience joy, and to remember that there's a community that is happy to be with you, and we follow a God who's happy to be with all of us. Have a great week.